Hello. I'm really angry about the abortion ban. When the Dobbs case came out, as I said in a previous video, I carefully evaluated the decisions of the majority and the dissenting opinion, as well as some parts of other opinions that were given from, say, like Clarence Thomas and Chief Justice Roberts. And as I stated in the other video, I never released my video about Dobbs. I have anxiety when it comes to editing, and I had to do a ton of editing, and it just got to the point where I couldn't handle it anymore. So the Dobbs thing, which I finished in 2022, has been just sitting in pieces ever since then, partially recorded, partially not. But ultimately, although I went back and forth as to whether I felt it was a justified or unjustified decision, and I did. Now, you got to understand, I'm pro-choice, okay? I'm not going to hide that. I'm pro-choice. But I approached this with a neutral viewpoint because I did not want to come to a conclusion based on my personal preferences or opinions or whatever. I wanted to understand why the majority of the judges had voted to kill Roe and Casey. And so sometimes I was like, okay, yeah, I think the majority are right. And then I would do some other research or reading, and then I'd be like, oh, I think maybe the dissenting justices were right. And then I'd go back and back and forth over and over again. Ultimately, when I had concluded my research, I'm not a lawyer. Kind of smart, but I'm not a lawyer. And I wouldn't want to be a lawyer. That's a hard job. But ultimately, what I discovered was that, number one, they were abusing stare decisis. They were cherry-picking precedents. Also, I discovered that although they talked about the fact that if there's substantial reliance on a law, that plays a role, but the justices in the majority wiped that completely off. And I also discovered that while Chief Justice Roberts attempted, somewhat cleverly, to hide that he was biased in the direction of pro-life, he failed to do so. And that, to me, was damning evidence, in addition to the various violations of Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, Alito, and Thomas. And that's a side thing, that's their behavior, except for as it relates to the case, is not directly relevant, but it shines a light on their character or lack of character, and that whether or not they have a propensity or even desire to vote in a particular direction rather than upholding the Constitution, which is the job of the justices of the Supreme Court. It is not their job to be political. It is not their job to impose their personal opinions. Now, and I will freely admit that the dissenting judges were also being not neutral. They were. This is a very volatile issue. I understand that, and I'm sure that some of the justices felt very, very strongly for personal reasons, and other justices very, very strongly for financial reasons, which is to say because they were being bribed, or they just didn't care. They were, highest bidder wins, my vote. But ultimately, in looking, some of the things that the majority presented as supporting their position was not actually relevant to the case. And overall, although there were some good arguments from the majority decision, what I came away with was they had put up those things to hide the fact that they were, for one reason or another, biased against abortion, and were not looking at the Constitution, but rather either financial gains or their own personal beliefs. So they failed as justices. Even the dissenting group, some of them failed to do the right thing. Now, I'm sure that some of the justices on both sides truly believed that they were doing the right thing for the Constitution, but the rest of them, and certainly Chief Justice Roberts, were not. And then Donald Trump keeps on saying again and again that he got rid of the ban by stacking the Supreme Court. Of course, Biden did actually put a Republican or conservative Ketanji into the Supreme Court as well. And that apparently was, good for the conservatives. But Trump says, I'm the one who got rid of the abortion, the pro-choice thing, and sent it to the states. Because everybody, the conservatives and the liberals, everybody, even the doctors, wanted that. And this is remarkable because it's a lie. It's such a blatant lie that I can't believe that anybody would believe it. I was never in favor of it. And if you look at the number of states that have rejected attempts to severely restrict abortion in their states, you can see that it's a lie. And the only states that have been successful are the states dominated by the Republicans, like Texas and Georgia. So, there's a famous guy named Roy Cohn. He was a lawyer, and he was also a con artist. And the man had no ethics. His playbook included, if I'm going to lose, I'm going to lie. And I'm going to keep on lying, and I'm going to litigate my opponents into the ground, if I can. And he mentored Trump. He taught him that you never back down, you go on the offensive, you lie, you exaggerate, you do whatever it takes to try and win, even when you are guilty. That is the way Roy Cohn operated. And later, Trump was mentored by, and is still mentored by, Roger Stone, who is not a lawyer, but plays by the same rules. Lie until you're either convicted or you get away with it. And that's what he did when he said that everybody wanted Roe and Casey to be gone. I didn't want it. And I know a lot of other people who didn't want it either. They didn't want that to happen. A lot of people were very, very distressed. My adult daughter was very, very distressed. And a lot of other people. I mean, millions and millions and millions of people did not agree with what Trump did. And now we have states in which extremely abusively restrictive abortion bans are in place. In some places, it's so restrictive and not written with the advice or help of medical experts that women are dying. Families are losing their mommies. This has happened in Georgia. We have women where the doctors are so terrified of going to jail, they will stand by and let their patients die because they're too afraid to uphold their Hippocratic oath in the face of maybe going to jail because of punitive, idiotic laws that prevent them from doing their job when somebody is in medical danger. Women are dying because of miscarriages, because their baby is stillborn and rotting inside their body, because their baby is severely damaged and will not survive, and if they do survive, they will die shortly after birth because their bodies are not developing. Women are being forced to carry to term dead babies. And some of them are dying because of it if they can't get help in a state that helps people. Now, in states like Georgia and Texas, apparently, there has never been much in the way of support for women who needed abortions. And now, women have literally died. So who's responsible for these deaths? Well, number one, Donald Trump. Number two, the Supreme Court majority that struck down Roe and Casey. Number three, any judge in any state that has supported the pro-life posture without consideration for incest, rape, and medical necessities. Number four, any voter who has supported this. You're all guilty of manslaughter, or womanslaughter in this case. You are all guilty of involuntary homicide. You talk about no baby should be killed. It doesn't matter how old it is. It doesn't matter if it's horribly deformed. It doesn't matter if it's dead and rotting. It doesn't matter if the body is miscarrying. You know, I listened this morning to the testimony of a woman who had to go through the removal of her cervix in Georgia without anesthesia. She was miscarrying, and she was at risk of developing sepsis, which is a deadly infection of the system, the entire body. And the doctor had to cut out that remainder of the miscarriage and part of her cervix to help her with no anesthesia. Can you imagine, ladies, a doctor going up into your vagina and cutting out your cervix, and you get to feel all of it? What kind of barbaric nation are we living in, where a woman's life means less than it did before? I'm disgusted. I am so... If I had a way to prosecute every person responsible for the suffering and death of these women, I would. I would prosecute every one of you. I would build new prisons. And I would put rapists in there with you so that you could understand what you did. I would put the pedophiles with you and the rapists and the murderers. Yes, you would be in high security at risk all the time, just like you have done to women in states with abortion bans that are unreasonable and not based on scientific and medical evidence, not based on the understanding that sometimes a baby can't be carried to term. Any woman who gets pregnant voluntarily wants that baby to survive. Sometimes it doesn't work out that way. You cannot say that any woman who has an abortion is evil or has committed murder when she's protecting her own life so that she can go home to her family, her children who are alive and need her, her husband who needs her, or wife. You cannot say that because you don't know what you're talking about. And you are complicit by voting for these extremely abusive abortion bans in murder of an adult. So here's what I'm going to say. If you are somebody who is pro-life because of religious beliefs, because you're a Christian of some kind, and you support 6-week bans, no rights for rape and incest and or medical emergencies, Or they're extremely restrictive in terms of medical emergencies to the point where a woman could die because the doctor can't act soon enough. Then you are not a Christian. You are not a pro-lifer. You are a murderer. If you say that I'm a Christian and I'm a pro-lifer, and yet you support people going off to war, you are a murderer. You are not a pro-lifer. You are not a Christian. Jesus did not teach what you are teaching. I'm fed up. You know, my sister is an evangelical Christian, and we've discussed abortion, and we actually agree. Because I don't believe in unfettered access to abortion. I don't believe in women using abortion as post-contraception care. Because, oops, I did it again. No. If you're just going to go get pregnant and abort because you're not being responsible enough, or your religion is stupid enough to say you can't use contraception, then have the baby. Or give it up for adoption. And just make sure, there are a lot of abusive families out there, so make sure you find a good, loving family. Not a family that's going to treat your child like a slave or a punching bag. And that's the sad truth of foster care and adoption. A lot of children are abused. I don't know the percentage, I just know from talking to people who've been in the system. To my sister's credit, she was in foster care and she did not abuse the kids. If you're going to go around screwing people, use contraception or don't have sex. Or stick it in areas that can't get pregnant. See, for me, if you've been raped, you have the right to abort that baby. Why? Because it is the child of abortion, of a violent act that has traumatized the woman. And that woman may never be able to separate the fact that that baby is not the rapist from her, in her mind. Because trauma has a way of preventing it. That's why my wife is dead. Not because she was raped, but because of all the trauma she went through while they were treating her for her cancer. The negligence, the abusive medical practitioners, the radiotherapy, the chemotherapy, the long trips out of the state or province, really, from one province to another to get care, because where we were living there was no way to get care at the level that was required. She slowly became so traumatized she wouldn't eat, and that's what actually killed her. She was stage 4 when she died, but she died because she had been starving herself because she was so traumatized that nothing was appealing to her. Do you know what it's like to watch the person you love starve to death? I was traumatized. Don't you dare tell me that women do not have the right to abortion. Now, if they're just doing it because they're being irresponsible, again, I don't agree. But if they've been raped, the chances are pretty high. I mean, that the woman will not be able, and maybe her husband also, will not be able to accept that their child is the product of rape. And that child will be neglected or abused or abandoned. It may result in the woman becoming a drug or alcohol addict to escape the memories. And thus that child will not have a functioning mother. And any other children in that family will not have a functioning mother, because you wouldn't let a rape victim get rid of the product of rape. Now you may think, oh, well, incest, that's different. That's consensual. No, it's not consensual when your parent comes to you and they say, I love you, and then they start petting you, and then they start doing other things with you, and you don't know which way is up, because here's a person that you love and trust, And they are taking advantage of your innocence. They are actually raping their kids or their stepkids or both. This is not a consensual relationship because the child doesn't get to say no and has to keep this secret. And sometimes the spouse either condones it or refuses to accept that it's happening, even though they know it's happening. And so the child has nowhere to turn and nothing they can do to stop the abuse until they can get out of the house. And then the chances are very high that they themselves will become child abusers because that's what they learned love is. So no, it's not okay to ban abortion for incest because it's just continuing and spreading the abuse. Did you know that child abusers will abuse sexually up to 400 children? So let's just say, and this is a lowball number. Let's just say that 50% of abused children will go on to become child abusers. So 50%, okay? 50% of 400 is 200. By the time that person has died, another 200. But we're not talking about this first generation, 400 kids, 200 of which become abusers, and then the second generation, we're not talking about one person here. We're talking about 200 people producing 200 child abusers minimum. And there are churches, there are cults where they actually protect the pedophiles. They vilify the children who have been molested and raped, tell them it's your fault. No, this is true. There are many documented cases where children are told, you must behave this way and dress this way, and if you don't do it exactly this way and you get raped, it's your fault. If you get molested, you did something wrong. You looked at him the wrong way, you smiled at him the wrong way, you turned your head the wrong way, you bent over the wrong way, you wore the wrong clothes, and therefore you deserved it. So the pedophile or other sexual abuser, sexual predators, get protected, and more and more and more children get abused. I was abused. My wife was abused. My daughter was almost abused. My son was abused. Not by me, and not by my wife. So don't you dare ever tell me that somebody who has been the victim of incest has no right to abortion. That's what I say to you. For rape and for incest, and most importantly of all, you've got a woman who's miscarrying. Do you know how painful a miscarriage is? My wife had miscarriages, but they were just blood because my wife had cervical cancer. But one time she showed me the product, the quantity of blood clot, the size. It was this big. And it was painful. And that was just blood. Because her cancer was making her cervix bleed. So imagine if it hurts just to bleed out, get out clotted blood the size of a baby's head, how's it going to feel to miscarry a baby? And yet, these women have no recourse because doctors have been made to fear that they're going to go to jail for protecting the mama. You disgust me if you think this is okay. You are not human. You're demons. How dare you? How dare you say, well, gosh, so the mama's got a baby, and the baby is heavily deformed and may not live for very many years. But you know what? That's not an excuse. The mama has to take care of, let that baby be born, and then suffer, and then die. And the mama and papa have to pay for all the bills. Do you know how many men will abandon their wives when the wife has to take care of a child that has so many problems, medically speaking? Do you know how many wives or mamas can't handle that and end up becoming addicts, end up neglecting their child, end up murdering their child? Do you know how hard it is to watch somebody you love die? I do. And yet, you call yourself pro-lifers. Ooh. Only for babies, though. Not for mamas, and not for military people. No. It's okay to die in war because that's noble. No, it isn't. You're not serving your nation. You're serving the rich. You're serving the military-industrial complex. You are serving resource extraction companies that go into the countries that we invade and take the resources of that country. Who has arranged that contract? Not the local government. No, it's the American government. They get to choose. Like when Bush became president and Cheney was the vice president, and Cheney was part of a company that was called Brown and Root. And Brown and Root was being sued by the American government. At the same time, Brown and Root was given a contract over in the Middle East. But I digress. The point is, the people that choose to join the military should be aware that you are not actually serving your country. You are serving the oligarchy. You are serving the plutocrats. You are serving the companies that do not care about human life and only care about wealth and power. So to conclude, I do not believe in unfettered access to abortion. I understand, however, that there are situations in which it is advisable for an abortion to be performed, especially rape, incest, and medical necessity. I also understand, however, that it is better for children to not be born than to be born into extreme poverty, addiction, and crime. Now, I want you to look at the child you love and imagine they were born into the ghetto. That their mama was a whore, their daddy was a pimp, both were using drugs. The child grew up being beaten, and if the child was a girl, she was at a certain age turned into a prostitute by her own father, maybe raped by him, but this is your child I'm talking about in that situation. Because it's easy to just dismiss this random anonymous child who has gone through that experience. But put your child in that position. That child grows up to be an addict and a prostitute and is abused until she dies young. And if it's a guy, turns into another pimp and abuses women. Congratulations! You're helping to destroy this world. Good job, morons. Look, I understand you're trying to do the noble, moral thing. But putting people in the position that your restrictions put, imposing your will, your beliefs on all the rest of us is not moral. It is immoral. You do not have a right to decide what we can and can't do unless we all agree. And we don't. And you're wrong. I feel sorry for the doctors and nurses who go home crying because they've watched a patient suffer, because their hands are tied by laws that were made by idiots. I feel sorry for the families who have watched their mama suffer and sometimes die because doctors couldn't do their job, because politicians and religious fanatics felt that the baby is more important than the family. that the baby is more important than the mama. Shame on you. You disgust me.